Boker Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for another sweeter than honey mystical insights into the Pesach Seder. Yesterday we discussed a lot, I suppose in our previous shiur we discussed a lot about the idea of telling the story and the importance of speaking the words of the story, that really through the words of our mouths, those same words will penetrate our hearts. And that really the essence of Pesach and the Pesach Seder is this the retelling of the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, because we have to know that story. That is the essence of Judaism. We find it in every single thing that we do. We have Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Everything is about the moment that we left Egypt, what happened in that moment, and how that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation until this very day. And so anyone can say whatever they want, but I know because my father told me and his father told him until the person who was there, right? So we know for a fact that we left Mitzrayim with wonders and miracles by the hand of God beyond any realm of the natural order of things. Now, as we talk about the natural order of things, it's very interesting to also note that, again, the Seder means order, right? We are ordering our meal for that evening. We are ordering the events of that evening. And so yesterday we talked about telling the story, but now I want to get into, before getting into the actual Seder itself, I want to talk a little bit about chametz and matzah. What is going on with this need to get rid of chametz and to only eat matzah? So we all know that the story is that we left Mitzrayim bechipazon, which means in a hurry, very, very rushed. And the story we were all raised with was that the dough didn't have time to rise, and so it became matzah, and that's why we eat matzah. But why do we have to get rid of chametz? And why do you have to get rid of saor? And so there's two things here. First off is chametz is bread, leavened product. And then there's saor, which is more of a sourdough kind of thing. The idea of saor, we'll get into this a little bit more deeply, is actually more strict than that of chametz, because bread is bread, but sourdough can make something that's not chametz into chametz. It itself is a creator of bread, of leavened product. So we have that story that we all know. We have to leave quickly. But what we don't realize is that the mitzvah of having matzah and not having chametz was given before we ever left. The final night in Mitzrayim, we were already commanded at that point to offer the Korban Pesach. And we were already told at that night to have matzah and to not find chametz anywhere. So what's that saying? It's saying, well, on the one hand, the reason we eat matzah and not chametz is because simply divine decree. But on the other hand, we can say there must be something more going on here. Now, the Knight of Pesach, one of the other names for it is called the Leil Shimurim. This is specifically about Seder nights. Leil Shimurim, which means the guarded evening. What are we guarding against? We're guarding against external forces that are looking to harm us. Think back to that first Seder, right? The first one in Mitzrayim, that was the night of Makat Bechorot. That was the same evening of the plague killing the firstborn, right? Outside was something terrible, and we had to stay inside doing our seders in order to be protected. So what's being protected? So again, this series is pretty much from this book, the Haggadah Shel Pesach of the Metok Midvash, the sweeter than honey commentary. It's a commentary primarily on the Zohar HaKadosh, the 12th century or 13th century big book of Kabbalah, as I like to call it. And it brings together all of these more mystical concepts into these ideas, and it gives us more of a deep spiritual understanding of what's happening. So what's happening when we have this Leil Shimurim, as we are protecting ourselves from having chametz u'matzah? He says that the Shekhinah is protected, is shmura, from achizat achitzonim, from being taken by external forces. The Shekhinah, as we may know, is the divine presence, the indwelling divine presence of God. What that means is the way that we can conceive of God in everything. When we are in the midst of tefillah, we are saying that we are in conversation, as it were, with the Shekhinah. We're in relationship with the divine presence. Why? Because we're doing something divine, that we're doing something that is specifically about connecting to Hashem. And so it becomes something that is about the divine presence in this world. When we do things in this world that are about our relationship with God, those are moments where we are manifesting the Shekhinah, the divine presence in this world. And on Leil Shimurim, on this night of Pesach, it says that the Shekhinah is completely protected from any external forces. That is to say, when we're sitting at our Pesach Seder, everything that we're doing, everything that's going on in the ordering of the meal, from Kiddush to washing our hands, to eating some vegetables, to breaking a matzah in half, to telling a story, all of these things are specifically set up in a way to manifest the divine presence in our lives. And at the same time, that this night, the Shekhinah is protected from any external forces. Nothing's going to get in the way of that. It's one of the most beautiful things that of all holidays that Jews celebrate, from the most religious to the most secular. The two that are everyone follows the most, one is Chanukah, which is all about bringing light into darkness, right? Which is all about even the most, it really was a war between the faithful and the secular anti-religious. Everyone celebrates bringing that light into the world by lighting Hanukkah candles, or Neirot Chanukah. We're going to get back to the idea of a Ner in just a second, which is why I wanted to say it. But the other one is the Pesach Seder. Everyone has a Pesach Seder to one degree or another. Everyone comes together for a Pesach Seder. And it's because we are tied into that divine presence. And so as it is protected, it, as it were, escorts us into this night. Now, we also know that on Pesach, we are guarding ourselves, as we've said, against having any chametz in our houses and against having any se'or in our houses. The way that we can understand the chametz and the se'or is that chametz actually represents our evil inclination, right? Why is chametz our evil inclination? Because it's puffed up. It is full of air, right? Just as we can think of somebody who is haughty, full of themselves, full of ego, or full of hot air, right? Where they have to have it a certain way because that's how I have to have it, and haha. On Pesach, we have to eliminate that. And so he says that the guarding against chametz is actually to alleviate any semblance of sin or any requirement of any kind of punishment for sin, God forbid, that we would incur in this world. Again, when we are involved in the Shekhinah, when we're involved in the Pesach Seder, when we're involved in this whole ordeal, this whole reliving of that first Pesach, of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, we recognize Hashem is running the world. It's not about us. It immediately lets us understand the world from this place of humility. Our Yetzer Hara, that which wants to tell us we're in charge, is nullified. And then when it comes to Se'or, he says, well, if the chametz is in this world, right? Remember, Se'or, while it is very bready itself, you can't eat a pure sourdough starter. It's too sour. You can't eat it, right? But it makes other things chametz. And he says that on Pesach, we're also guarding against Se'or, which means that our nishamot, our higher selves, if you will, our souls, are guarded. He says from Malachei Chevla, which means from the angels of pain, really. It's interesting, this word Chevel, for pain, it's when we talk about the Messianic era, we talk about the time leading up to the Messianic era is Chevlei HaMashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach. Similarly, there's the word Chevlei Leida. It's the pangs, the pain of childbirth, right? Sure, in childbirth, the mother goes through extreme pain, but it is to escort new life into the world. And what he says is that on Pesach, all of the messengers of pain, all of those things that cause us pain in order to merit a great light afterwards, that pain is nullified. We don't have to go through it because we're automatically escorting ourselves through this process of the guarding against Seor. And to such a point where Chametz and Seor are regarded as the essence, the foundational principles of judgment, of harshness, right? Because while we think maybe matzah is more harsh because it cracks and it doesn't have as much air, but matzah is pure in its essence. It is flour and water. You can't get more basic and more pure than that. Chametz, right? You can add so many things to it to flour it up and to make it rise and to make it sweet and this, that, and the other. And that really, we're saying that the need to make things sweet is only because those things in their essence represent harshness. And he goes again, the idea that the Seor is so much harsher than even Chametz is because the Seor makes other things Chametz. So not only are we guarding ourselves against those Chametzes that we already have, those things that we already have that maybe I'm saying, maybe I could do without, maybe that's something I should get rid of from myself. But we're saying even those parts of me that could cause me to have something that I would want to get rid of. Maybe in and of itself, it's nothing really. It's something I can't taste, right? I can't even stand to have it. It's too bitter. But to know that even that thing can still affect me in such a way that it can cause me to have more chametz in my life. And so we want to get rid of all of that. Any of the things that we do that we want to improve on, and any of the things that could cause us to do things that we'd want to improve upon. We get rid of all of it. Now, how do we get rid of it? We go through our houses and we search for it, right? We search by the light of a candle. And he goes on, he says, a ner, this candle, the light of the candle specifically, represents the Shekhinah, again, that divine presence. Right? There's a beautiful idea that in a room full of darkness, all you need is a single candle, a single bit of light to illuminate the entire space. And that really, that's the same idea that it could be a world full of darkness, but all we need is a little bit of light, and that can really absolve and alleviate all of that darkness. And what is that? When we see a world that is void of godliness, we shine a little bit of light and we bring godliness into the world. And that is the candle. This candlelight, just like we talked about at Hanukkah, how the candle brings light into the darkness. Here, the candle that we use to search for the chametz in our house, that is, we're essentially using the Shekhinah, right? We're using that divinity, that divine presence to search the deepest crevices of our homes, of our hearts, to remove the chametz. He has a very nice little idea here about bar mitzvah. I'm going to just say it very simply, where he says that really a person, until they reach the age of mitzvot, looking more at the age of 13, it does not have a yetzer hara, does not have an evil inclination, right? And at the age of bar mitzvah, that person then receives the potential for their evil inclination to take hold and to control them. And he says that the idea of searching for the chametz with a candle. So when the Talmud talks about that search, it says or la'arba asar, right? On the eve of the 14th of Nisan, that's when we should do the search. And he says, what's the eve of the 14th? That's when you're 13 less a day. And when you're on the day that you turn 13 years, the bar mitzvah is really the next day. That's when you become obligated, 13 plus a day. So he says, and that's the beginning of the 14th year of life. So he says, what is that or la'arba asrei? That is the day when you are 13 exactly, that is leading you into the 14th year of your life. And he says that we have to check on the or la'arba asar with the candlelight. We have to use that divine presence. We have to imbue ourselves and our hearts and our souls with that divine presence. as we are about to enter into any mitzvot, to absolve ourselves of that heaviness and of the Yetzer Hara, to really recognize where it could take hold. Now, what happens when we're already adults past the age of B'nai Mitzvah? So fundamentally, the concept is the same. As we are entering into Pesach, we are recognizing again, we are Hashem's children. Hashem takes us out of Mitzrayim. And that means that at this moment, we have that opportunity to go back through our whole lives, and with that light of a candle, to shine the Shekhinah into our whole lives and to truly remove any semblance of Yetzer Hara, of evil inclination, of inclination for destructive behavior, and to remove it from our life. Now, all of this is Nechametz and Seor, and removing them. But he goes on and he says, okay, so what's the essence then? What is the essence of the preparation for this Pesach holiday? He says that the purpose is that every single one of us needs to, just as we said, remove any kind of ra, any kind of inclination towards destruction from our hearts. And he says this beautiful thing, here's where we get really into the Kabbalistic way of thinking. We have to turn the chametz into matzah. So he says we're not just getting rid of the chametz and bringing in matzah. He says we actually have to, in our hearts, turn the chametz into matzah. Now, this seems opposite from what we know in the physical world. In the physical world, right, if we have matzah and we leave the flour in the water slightly too long, like to 18 minutes and 1 second, right, then the matzah becomes chametz and you can't have it anymore. He says, but our goal on Pesach is to turn chametz into matzah, and there's two ways to envision that. First, we have to recognize that the letters of the words chametz and matzah both have a mem and a tzadik, but chametz has a chet at the beginning, and matzah has a hey at the end. Right, the mem tzadik are there for both. So what we have to essentially do is we have to take that chet at the beginning and we have to turn it into a hey at the end. So what's that all about? How do we do that? What's the practical relevance of that nice little idea? He says, well, first off, let's look at those letters. A chet is only open at the bottom, right? And a hey is open both at the bottom and at the side towards the top. So what does that mean? That means that a chet is only looking down. A chet is only open to what's going on down. It's only focused on the physical world. It's only focused on the day-to-day, the things that we need for life, all of those kind of selfish needs that we have. A chet is that. Even the word chet itself is reminiscent of the word chet, which means to miss the mark or to sin, right? I don't like that word sin. It really means to miss the mark, to miss the opportunity of doing a mitzvah or doing something properly. But regardless, the idea is that we have to take that chet and we have to essentially break down that chet. We have to break the sin, we have to break the letter and create an opening up top. And that opening up top is that opening that lets us recognize that everything has a much higher and deeper purpose. That really it's not just about being part of the world, but it's also having an eye to heaven and to recognize that the things we do in this world actually are what give us our spiritual potential and our spiritual strength. And he goes on, he says, we have to take out that, he says it differently now. First he says you have to move it, right? You have to switch it. But then he says, the other way is to actually remove that extra point, right? Turn the chet into a hey, right? And what do you do? Literally, you just have to erase that one spot, right? And from that to make matzah. And what's that one spot? That one spot above is the ego. That is the Yetzer Hara. That is the evil inclination. And again, we have to remove that evil inclination. And once we take away that nikuda, that point that makes us pursue destructive behaviors, generally for our own self-aggrandizement or self-desires, he says the whole idea is to empower our Yetzer Tov, our inclination for constructive and empowering behavior, and to nullify our sense of self and our sense of ego, right? And we have to, through that, we have to remove all of our negative behaviors and our negative services and the things that we do that we know about ourselves that I wish was different. He says the whole point here is that I have to focus on those points and I have to remove those points from my heart. And once I do that, I've opened up that space up top for matzah, for the hay of teshuvah, the hay of return, of reconnection. And ultimately that upper space will allow for the inward flow of holiness and goodness and blessing to flow into each of our hearts. And so with that, we're going to conclude for today. So I want to give everyone a bracha that really we should spend these days preparing for Pesach, not just removing the chametz from our homes, but also focused a little bit on removing the chametz from our hearts in order that we can be ready to have a life that is focused on the matzah and on spiritually being connected to our own souls and ultimately to God and the Shekhinah and the divine presence in the world. Yashar Kochem, everyone, for joining me this morning. Bezrat Hashem, we will pick up again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another sweeter than honey mystical insights from the Pesach Seder. Have a wonderful day. Shalom.
Thank you.